The storm arrived faster than anyone thought it would. Snow poured down in heavy curtains and turned Maple Street into a white blur. Streetlights blinked as if unsure of their task. On a small porch, Mrs. Eleanor Harris wrapped a faded shawl around her shoulders and watched the weather alert on her old television. At 82, she had known cold winters, but she remembered what her mother had taught her. People matter more than weather. Eleanor lived above a cleaning supply shop she had helped run for years. Her husband had died long ago, and her children lived far away, busy with their own families. Her life was quiet: soup on Wednesdays, church choir on Sundays, tiny kindnesses during the day. She kept busy with mending, sweeping, and the slow, sure routine of someone who had learned to make do. When she heard a cry outside, she opened the door to find a young woman pushing a stroller through the wind. 2 others staggered behind her, a man clutching a suitcase and a teenage boy. Snow clung to their eyelashes. The woman's lips were blue. "Our car slid off the road," she said. "My baby can't feel her toes." Eleanor moved like she always did, by the muscle memory of goodness. She had a kettle on before they finished speaking. She led them to the wood stove, wrapped the baby in quilts, and brewed tea. The family called themselves the Whitakers, Claire, Daniel, and their son Jamie, and they had been traveling to a lake house for the holidays when the storm trapped them. Outside, the county radio warned of stranded travelers from town to town. Tow trucks could not reach the bridge. The Whitakers were frightened and wet, and so grateful for warmth that Claire sobbed into a towel Eleanor had set out. Jamie clung to a paper with doodles and refused to look at the snow. Daniel, shoulders tight with responsibility, examined the roof as if calculating escape routes. Eleanor had little to give but what money could not buy: a hot pot of stew, clean blankets, and the steady assurance of someone who had weathered worse. She gave Claire the spare bed, covered Jamie in a quilt she'd stitched last spring, and held little Grace until the baby stopped trembling. They stayed 2 nights, then 3, until a neighbor with a plow finally carved a ribbon of road through the drift. During those days, the strangers became housemates in miniature. Daniel learned to light the stove without muttering. Claire told stories of city days, of nights at the hospital and the pressure of balancing work and home. Jamie taught Eleanor to whistle a tune he'd made up, and she hummed hymns that soothed them like cotton. They ate at the small round table like people who had practiced gratitude as a survival skill. When the thaw came and the Whitakers left, they hugged Eleanor as if she had been a relative. They promised letters and visits. Eleanor returned to her quiet life, but felt a slight shift in her chest, as when a knot is loosened. She told no one of expectations. Then a photo arrived, Claire on the porch with a note: "Thank you. Let us help you." Eleanor bristled at the idea of accepting charity. Pride is an old friend. Yet the Whitakers were persistent in a way that softened her resistance. They came back in spring with paint cans and a ladder, with Daniel carrying a toolbox like a new profession. "We can't leave you with that roof," he said. "We promised." The roof was the first thing fixed. Volunteers who had heard the story brought shingles and good humor. They climbed, sang, and nailed until the rain had nowhere to creep in. Next came the stove, replaced with a small, efficient range that didn't wheeze. Jamie, who loved to draw, painted a mural in the spare room, wildflowers and a river that meandered up the wall, bright enough to make Eleanor laugh when she woke in the morning. But the repairs were only the beginning. Claire organized a schedule so someone would bring a warm meal each week. Daniel, who had left his corporate job after the accident that had once rattled their family, started teaching winter safety classes and volunteered with a county rescue team. He recruited neighbors and colleagues to check on elderly residents during storms. Jamie, who had always sketched, sold prints of his work at a local market to raise funds for a community shelter the family chose to support. Eleanor watched these changes with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. Her modest shop began to see more customers, people drawn not only by the supplies but by the idea of a community that cared. Young parents came by asking for advice and left with soap and a recipe for stew. Neighbors who had once nodded politely now came in to share news and to volunteer for small tasks. A local non-profit offered to include Eleanor in an elder support program that provided winter checks, minor repairs, and a list of contacts to call if the power went out. With a new roof and a new stove, Eleanor's life widened in ways she hadn't expected. She signed up for a book club at the library and found herself arguing gently about a mystery novel with people in their 30s and 60s. She began teaching a quilting circle at the church, drawing women who wanted to learn the patterns her mother had taught her. They came for stitches and stayed for conversation. Young mothers brought babies and left with patched sleeves, recipes, and a friend who listened. On a clear afternoon, Claire handed Eleanor a folder with paperwork inside. It was a small deed granting part ownership of the shop's back room as a rightful space for Eleanor's things, for safety. "We want you to have this," Claire said. "You gave us shelter. We want to make sure you're never left behind." Eleanor wept long into the evening. She thought of her husband, of baking bread for soldiers years ago, of the quiet days that had been enough until they weren't. She had always thought of kindness as its own reward. Learning to let people be kind to her was a new lesson, one that turned out to be gentle, like warm tea. Time stitched a new pattern. Seasons turned. Spring brought crocuses, and the town held a fundraiser at the community center. The Whitakers organized it, and people came with pies and quilts. Jamie sold prints of his sketches, Daniel spoke about volunteer training, and Claire thanked everyone by name. A young mother named Rosa came into the shop with a casserole and 2 toddlers. Eleanor had once helped Rosa when money was tight. Now Rosa was on the meal rota organized by Claire. "You saved my holiday," she said, and Eleanor felt her small life joining others. The quilting circle became a lively gathering. Teenagers learned to press seams. Men in their 60s came for the stories. Eleanor taught patience, how to fix a snapped thread, and how to listen when someone needed to speak. At the shop, Eleanor started a small supply bank where people donated soap and towels. The board above the counter filled with names, requests and offers, a humble ledger of care. Years later, the Whitakers hosted an art show at the library. Eleanor attended with the help of a cane and saw her mural reproduced on canvas. Daniel introduced her gently. "She taught us about home." She blushed and felt the room of people like another quilt around her shoulders. Eleanor's past threaded through everything. She often remembered the early years, the sewing room where she and her husband had mended uniforms for neighbors, the bakery shift where her hands learned to knead even when hunger lived at the edges of the family, the long walks to church with a lantern. Those memories kept her steady and fed the small rituals she offered to others. One spring, her eldest daughter, Lorraine, whose life had always been busy with a distant city job, came to visit during the fundraiser. Their relationship had been polite but distant for years. Phone calls had slowed to holidays and quick updates. Lorraine hesitated at the shop's threshold, then stepped in as if through a doorway that reconnects margins. They did not rush to forgiveness. Some things take time, but they sat together at the quilting circle, and Lorraine listened when Eleanor spoke about the nights she had baked bread for soldiers and the quilts she'd sewn for neighbors. The conversation was uneven, honest, and warm in ways both of them needed. The town still faced hard winters, but the circle of help had grown. Teenagers shoveled for seniors. A volunteer group installed a small ramp at the shop. The mayor visited one afternoon to thank volunteers. Eleanor, always modest, accepted the small honors with quiet pride. There were harder moments, too. Once a winter, the town faced a longer storm that strained even the volunteer teams. There were nights when the phone would ring and someone would say, "We need warm blankets," or "Can somebody check on Mr. Peters?" And sometimes Eleanor would be the one to offer the kettle and the quilts again. That was part of the circle, the accepting and the returning. No kindness was a debt to be collected. It was a habit of being. When a local reporter wrote a short piece about the town's volunteer efforts, mentioning Eleanor and the mural, more visitors came to the shop. Some came out of curiosity, some to buy prints, some to donate a little. Youth groups wanted to learn how to knit. The shop's corkboard filled with notes, requests for rides, offers to pick up prescriptions, sign-ups to clear sidewalks. A rhythm of looking after one another had been set. Jamie grew into his art. He spent afternoons teaching children to sketch at the library. Daniel's volunteer team trained neighbors on how to check pipes and keep gas lines safe during freezes. Claire's small charity became known locally for its winter meal drives. The mural in Eleanor's spare room faded at the edges, but never lost the brightness that had first startled her awake. People often asked Eleanor what had changed her life. She would tuck a stray hair behind her ear, smile, and say, "A storm showed me we're not islands." The truth was small and simple. She had always helped others. Now others were helping her, and in that exchange the town became more knit. On cold evenings, Eleanor sat by the stove with a book and a cup of tea, the radio playing soft music. Guests came and went, neighbors, choir members, and sometimes the Whitakers, who now felt like family. She still mended collars and brewed tea, but she also sat on the stoop with friends, trading small news and laughter. The shop stayed modest, but it was full of voices and plans and the steady business of a community that had learned to pass light forward. The storms did not stop coming, but the town had learned a vital truth. Kindness spreads when given and when accepted. Eleanor had taught them to give without counting, and they had taught her to accept without shame. Together they had built a warm network strong enough to guide anyone through the long nights. When asked what good comes from hardship, Eleanor would think of a baby with cold toes, of a teenage boy who taught her to whistle, and of a husband she still missed. She would smile and say simply, "We took each other's hand." Under the soft glow of a kitchen lamp, with a night wind whispering outside, she knew she would pass that hand forward when the next traveler came knocking.